everyone. Welcome to Sailor's Talk. This is an unofficial gathering of former Israeli Navy SEALs. We call it in Hebrew, Parliament Siach Shaytim. We meet every few weeks. This is our 33rd meeting since the war started. We hosted former directors and chief of each of Israel defense agencies. If anyone mute, make sure to unmute them. We hosted former director chiefs of each one of Israel defense agencies, politicians like former prime minister, religious and academic leaders, and we are far from coming to a consensus on what we do next with this war. This is going to be our third meeting focusing on Egypt. The ongoing war is putting the relationship between Israel and Egypt to a test, a difficult test. We aim to deepen our understanding on Egypt, our largest neighboring country, and we would like to understand Egypt's internal complexities. We want to understand how the peace is going also from their perspective. So far, we spoke with Smadar Perry on Egypt, which he knows a lot on a personal level. We spoke with some professors like Yoav Dikapwa, which is also with us today, and Mira Tzoref. But we haven't had a chance to speak with a real Egyptian. Today, we are lucky to speak with a real Egyptian. Ezzedine, hello, say hi.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me.
You are very welcome. So in a minute, we will be with you. So a little bit about what's going in Israel. The Israeli government decided to expand the war in Gaza, stop the hostage that was brokered between Israel and Hamas by Egypt and by Qatar. Many in the Israeli public and in the Navy SEALs community publicly expressed their dissatisfaction, including protesting and signing petitions against the war. Our co-host today is going to be Smadar Perry from Yedioth Ahronoth, and we're going to have Dr. Yoav Dikapwa, which we hosted 2 weeks ago, and also will help us. And we're going to try to, with the help of Ezzedine and our co-host, to understand what is going on between Egypt and Israel. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Ezzedine, our guest for tonight. Good evening, Ezzedine, and thank you so much for hosting, for coming to join us. I gotta tell you, I looked for Egyptians all over, and no one wanted to talk to us.
So you had to talk to me ultimately.
So you are our savior. So tell us what's going on. Why and how come Egyptians doesn't want to talk to us?
Well, I don't know who you talk to or how many, but if you're talking to people from the intellectual elite, they would be most likely bound by the famous boycott of Israel. And that boycott is not just a personal decision, it is an institutional reality. So if you are, say, a journalist and you talk to Israelis, the journalist syndicates might suspend you or sanction you. So it is not just a personal decision by people, there are practical consequences. In addition, the general mood in Egypt since the war started has gone much more in a negative direction as far as Israel is concerned. So I think it would be very hard for anybody from Egypt to at least publicly be talking to Israelis.
Got it. That's a opportunity to introduce the term called tatbiya, which we heard before in our conversations with Dr. DiCapua and Dr. Soref, which is some kind of a, maybe you can explain a little bit more about the tatbiya. In Hebrew, tatbiya is to sink. We are Navy SEALs, we like to sink ships. So tatbiya is now have a different terminology. Teach us, what is this meaning of tatbiya?
Well, it's very simple. تطبيع is from طبيعي, from normal. So normalizing the idea when Egypt signed the peace treaty with Israel, the peace treaty includes normalizing relations between the two countries. The elite, which was at least at the time dominantly leftist, and then with Islamists joining in, the elite couldn't stop the peace treaty from taking place. So they decided to have, if you want, their own popular foreign policy. And that foreign policy was, okay, fine, the government can have an embassy in Israel and have diplomatic relations, but we, the people, are not going to have relations with Israel. And from there came that wave and that movement that wants to prevent and stop, if it happens, prevent any acts of rapprochement between the two countries. And that covers all sorts of things from movies and intellectual property rights to trade to visits to Copts not going to Jerusalem for pilgrimage and this kind of thing.
If
And
it's okay,
sometimes it's even it becomes a bit silly, like if you're a tourist in Sinai and then somebody could, oh, you're from Israel, and then they turn around and not talk to you. This kind of thing.
okay. Um, we would like to ask you some personal questions. We'd like to get to know you a little bit. We call this thing the witness credibility. Okay.
Oh, I'm not very
you,
credible, I'm just saying.
so we're going to check out your credibility. So
Okay.
first of all, the rumor that you were born in Kuwait.
Uh-huh.
So tell us a little bit about your upbringing. You were born, you and I are a few months apart. So I'm very interested to learn what Egyptian thought of Israel, because I can tell you what we in Israel thought of Egyptians.
Okay.
I was born right within around what we call the 6-Day War. What do you guys call this?
67.
67. Okay.
Yeah, 67
So
war.
you
We're very
so,
kind of boring. We don't have
okay.
many names, yes.
Okay. And we grew up in Israel in a place where Egypt was the first enemy. They are they are the scary guys. Our parents were in war with you guys, and we were practically taught to be afraid and uh, to grown to be soldiers to kill Egyptians one day. How was it to grow in Egypt? What was your perspective?
Well, I was born in Kuwait for an Israel-related reason. So my father is from Ismailia originally, and so when he got married, both parents were in Ismailia, but he had a business there and they lived there, and that was destroyed in '56. So when that happened, they were like a lot of people moved to the Delta and became basically IDPs, internal displaced people. And for a couple of years, my dad couldn't find a job because also these were the '60s and the Egyptian economy has always been struggling, but the '60s were hard. So ultimately, he got himself a job in some place that he hadn't heard of before called Kuwait. And apparently there were hiring people. So he went to Kuwait and got a job there. And this is how I got born in Kuwait. But if you know anything about the Gulf countries, you know that it's not a very welcoming environment for immigrant workers. So ultimately, it's hard to get in schools and so on. So they decided, my parents decided that it's probably better if my mom comes back with the kids to Egypt and my father stayed in Kuwait. So I grew up in Egypt. So I basically was born in Kuwait, spent there a couple of years, but grew up in Egypt. In Mansoura, if you heard of that, it's a little town by the Nile, next to an airport,
Okay.
a military airport. So that other part is also Israel related because I grew up. So I'm born in '66, and I grew up in the shadow of air raids. So we had the windows were covered always. We covered our windows with this dark kind of paper so that when there is a night raid, we turn off the light and we go in the shelters. I guess you're familiar with that practice, but
Yeah.
this is how I grew up as well. And we had, a picture on the wall of my uncle who died in '67 and this kind of thing. So we grew up, and of course, the media, Yoav probably can tell you more about the media and how the Egyptian government controlled media had like a very intense anti-Israeli campaign. So this is the environment you grow up if you're my age in Egypt.
And when was the first time you met an Israeli? How
Uh,
old were you?
well,
I can tell you my first time meeting a real Egyptian
uh-huh,
is when I crossed the border to
uh-huh,
Sinai after the peace treaty.
yes,
First of all, when Sadat came, we all were crying, and it was like, wow, I can't believe it. And Smadar told us all about it and how he got out of the plane. And the chief of staff was about ready with his Uzi if something happened. But
what,
but the
what
first
do you
time
do with the Uzi?
yeah, but the first time I met a real Egyptian is when I crossed the border to Egypt. And man, I was like, oh, everyone looked like suspicious to me. But then I started talking to them. I'm like, whoa, they're normal people. They're so friendly. They're so welcoming. They're so warm. So
Yeah,
my personal observation of not knowing and growing in a place where Egypt was the hostile and we have to fight them. And then when I was in my 19, maybe I met my first Egyptian. It was like, wow, what a big difference. Tell us
yeah.
about the time you had the first introduction, and I know you lived in Israel for a while.
Yeah, the first time I was 19 and I was in college and I was working in a hotel as a waiter. And I'm serving somebody. She was a young woman who was very beautiful. And as a good waiter, I was a little bit flirtatious, and she was as well. And then one thing led to another, and she gave me cigarettes. And then I hold the cigarettes, and it's in Hebrew. I was like, "What is that?" And she said she's from Israel. Her name was Mirav, by the way, I still remember. And then Mirav said she's from Israel. And I, as a good Egyptian 19-year-old Cairo University, gave her back the cigarette. They're just like, I'm sorry, I can't talk to Israelis, and then left. My loss. But this was my first encounter.
Uh, when I grew up, and another thing is my first memory of my father. My father was a parachuter, this is like elite unit in Israel, infantry. And between 1967 and 1973, there was like a one big long war, basically. And my father was going to reserve service for many months. And he would come, and one time I remember I was maybe 4 or 5, and someone was knocking on the door, and I opened the door, and I saw this soldier with like a machine gun with a big beard, and I called mom and I said, "Mom, there's a soldier here for you." And I ran away to play, and I guess it was my father, and I didn't recognize him because I was young and he wasn't there for a few months, and
Yeah,
suddenly this thing come to my house. So this is kind of memories of
yeah.
Israelis. I want to hear how was your memories at this time?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked this question because now things have changed, thankfully, and we joke about it. But at the time, these were real painful things for everybody. People who lost loved ones in wars, it's not really a joking matter. Even as a kid, other than the uncle that we had this picture on the wall, but there is the constant war and threat of war. You say between 67 and 73, this was the attrition war, right? So there are things happening all the time. As a kid, my favorite uh, anchor on the TV, the one who, the one who's presenting the children program, was killed by the Israeli air defense. She was in one passenger plane that apparently lost its way, got into Sinai, and got shut down by Israel. A school nearby got bombed near our town. An elementary school got bombed by Israel in Bahr al-Ba'r. So my first play, my first act on stage when I was a kid is to kind of impersonate one of the kids. So these things, even for kids, it kind of seeps in and it contributes to building an emotional template that is difficult to dislodge.
When we met last time with Yoav and Yoav and Smadar, you feel free to jump in. Yoav, explain us the meaning of the military in Egypt. How much it owns a lot of stuff and it's a big part of the country. In Israel, it's the same. We say there's a country with a military. In Israel,
The
we like to
military with
joke we have a military with a country.
We say the same, by the way. Yes.
Okay, so
Yeah.
so it's very much, I guess, the same. In growing up, in Israel, they literally groom you to be a warrior. When you are born, they kind of they plant a sword in your hand and they tell you like go fight. And a lot of people on this call, all they wanted to do is become warriors.
Yeah.
Is this the same thing that happened in Egypt?
I think generally, yes, but probably less than the way you describe it. Maybe it's just the difference of numbers, but the animosity is the same. The the animosity to or the expectation of the war that you have to be ready, that you have to push back, that you have to contribute. So not necessarily you have to get the sword yourself, but at least you have to be ready to find something to do to support those who carry the sword.
Interesting. Fast forward many years later.
Yeah.
You find yourself as a diplomat in Tel Aviv, right?
Yes.
The city, the 24/7 city, the city with all the many people rate Tel Aviv as the best fun city in the world. Everything is open, the biggest great gay parade, the great bars and beaches and stuff like that. How was it to live as Egyptian in Israel?
It was very challenging. It was very challenging because you can't, as a diplomat, as a diplomat from Egypt, you can't take it as a normal place. If you come with all this background, with this upbringing, I want you to think of the following. If you grow up thinking all the war heroes in Israel are considered war criminals in Egypt, those who built the state of Israel are seen as, the great conspirators against the Arab nation and against Egypt. So even physically and visually in Tel Aviv, the bigger the street is, the bigger the hero is, the bigger the street, right?
Exactly,
But also,
exactly.
so everybody that you think negatively of is respected and venerated and has, a street in their name and so on. So moving physically, spatially in Tel Aviv in itself is challenging for an Arab kid, whether from Egypt or anywhere. And then the places. So I first, when I arrived, I went to Jaffa. Somebody told me, you know, it's nice to live there. So I went to Jaffa to look for an apartment. And then I was with a colleague. The two of us arrived at the same time. He was the deputy ambassador. And then we arrived there. I think it's called Andromeda Hill or something. That was
Yeah.
at the time was still being built. And our first question, we look at each other, is like, is this built over some Arab house? Did they kick some Palestinians to build this house? And everywhere we go, it's the same question. So, so we're looking because you have in your mind this is Palestine with Israel superimposed on it. So everything you look at, you wonder in your mind what is beneath that? What is the history of this place? I go to Tel Aviv University, and then suddenly there is an Arab house in the middle, and that's I think it's Baidas, the
Sheikh Munis.
Sheikh Munis, right? But the guy, his name is Baidas. It's called Baidas House, I think, which is the university center. So there is these constant reminders. You can't fool yourself. You can't tell yourself this is like Greece. It is not. It's beautiful. It's modern. It is welcoming. It's all of this. It's fun. But there is always, if you're coming from my background, there is always this challenge how to deal with it.
But you have the same in Egypt, where there was a huge Jewish community, and they had to run away, and they left, and the people just settle in.
Probably, yeah, but Egyptians don't go around in Egypt thinking this was a Jewish house, right? Probably as much as. I'm sorry?
I'm saying, of course, they know that that this was a Jewish house and so on. But
Not
things
where I come
change.
from.
We are now in a situation of semi-peace or something like that.
Yes, you're asking about my experience. I'm telling you my experience. I never went around in Cairo thinking, oh, there were Jews here and they were kicked out. It was never part of my upbringing.
Ezzedine, Israelis only think of their side. They never take the other side. So
I think everybody does. It's legitimate. Everybody does that. It's just I think the key is for everybody to understand that everybody thinks about their side. That's normal.
I want to kind of take a little pause and open this first section. It's about you guys. The next section is going to be about the book, All This Nonsense, which we will talk very shortly about, which basically talk about everything that's happening in Egypt, and then the next thing is going to be about the next chapter are going to be about the Israel and Egypt relationship. But at this point, I'm opening the microphone only to personal question to Ezzedine. And Ezzedine, I hope it's okay. I'm calling you Ezzedine and not Dr. Fisher,
Oh,
because
sure.
I know
Please, yeah.
you're
Yeah,
okay.
not-
It's a very informal here.
So I
Go
have a
ahead,
question.
Gideon.
I have a question. I'm Dirty Duck. Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself, but I'm Dirty Duck. Thank you very much for being with us today. We've talked in the last two meetings. We heard a lot about Nasser and Sadat and Assisi and Mubarak and about the transition that happened and how they changed their leadership style. They had different leadership styles. And I'm wondering, from your perspective as a child or as a teenager or as a young adult, how did you view each one of them as they've progressed in leadership and as it affected you personally and how you felt that it affected the country?
So by that, so I'm born in 66. So this is a generation that grew up with Nasser as an idea, not as a person, right? And most of the elite at the time had an anti-Sadat position and a pro-Nasser position. So I remember I have a picture of myself on one of a school celebration, and I'm standing and I'm holding a picture of Nasser. And I was probably 8. So I clearly had no idea what that, but that was a symbol of some Arab something. And the dominant view of Sadat as I remember at the time, was very critical and kind of not even critical, it's just not convincing. That he was not convincing. He didn't fill that space. He always seemed like a substitute, that the real thing is gone prematurely, and it's just like we ended up with this guy. And then there was a period after the peace initiative, after the visit to Jerusalem and then the negotiations, where he grew in moral size and became a dominant figure. But with the difficulties of the negotiations, that kind of diminished. And then he went, and that's probably not many people outside Egypt pay attention to this. The year 79, 80 to 81 to his assassination, the story in Egypt was not about Sadat, the peacemaker. It was about Sadat, the ruler, and Sadat, the governor. And Sadat, the governor, had so many problems with almost every faction of the political landscape and with the people, because he started to deregulate the economy and the prices went up. We had this riots in 77. So by 1980, he was a very disliked figure. And I remember, with probably also a sense of shame, when we heard the news of his assassination, a lot of people were relieved and cheered and so on. Mubarak was, I don't know how to explain it. The expectation of Mubarak was a lot less. Nobody expected Mubarak to be a great personality. He was like a bureaucrat. And he's probably has a character of a bureaucrat. So for as far as I remember, this is how Mubarak was judged. And there was opposition. There was some people who was like, it's okay. But there was nobody was like, oh, we have such a great leader. That was never the case.
But we don't know Sisi. Can you portray the figure, because you are far away from Egypt? It's easy. It might be easier for you.
Yeah, it's fine. I'm it's all right. Sisi, I think to understand people's attitudes to Sisi, you have to link it to the Tahrir uprising. While the view of Mubarak had to do with the economic conditions, with Sadat had to do with both economic and political and the war, but Sisi's, the attitudes were mainly, for a long time, until a couple of years ago, about what your position is from the Tahrir uprising. If you were a supporter of the democratic movement, then you have very strong negative feelings about Sisi. Whether you were on the liberal side like myself or you were on the Muslim Brotherhood side. Either way, if you supported democratic transition, for you, Sisi is the embodiment of the abortion of that democratic transition. And if you felt threatened by this democratic transition back then, like a lot of Egyptians did, then you see Sisi as a savior. And those feelings continued maybe until a couple of years ago. Now, the Sisi managed to run the economy to the ground and to get Egypt into a huge debt problem, bordering bankruptcy. And that kind of supersedes, but doesn't negate, supersedes the initial attitude towards Sisi. So even if you were a supporter and viewed Sisi as a savior, the economic mismanagement overshadows that today. Having said this, there is a segment of Egyptian society that is very committed to Sisi and sees him until today, despite the economic difficulties, as a true savior and rebuilder of Egypt, something that is comparable in their mind to Nasser, but also to Muhammad Ali 200 years ago. This is a guy who's going to build Egypt as a great nation, the Egypt they dream of, the Egypt that will rise, the Nahda, all of that. Sisi is the one who's going to do it. And for them, those economic issues are just bad luck, the war in Ukraine, Gaza, all of this. But ultimately, the foreign powers are trying to bring him down, but he is the savior. So you have those different shades of attitudes towards Sisi.
But there is a big debate in Israel, is Sisi ruling Egypt or the military?
There is, okay, well, there is this question all the time. And again, people would disagree on this because to have an accurate assessment of this, you have to have privileged access to people who count in the, general stuff and so on. But the impression I get from people I talk to is that Sisi has managed to tighten his control over the military and has managed over the years, the recent years, to dismiss everybody who could be a potential power center in the military. Today, if you ask 10 Egyptians, what's the name of the Minister of Defense? Probably 8 would not know because he keeps changing them and he keeps moving people around. So you don't stay in your
That's
post.
okay. Also in Israel, we keep forgetting who's the minister of what. It's always Bibi.
Maybe this is why they like each other.
I want to interfere with a non-related question. They told me not to ask it, but I will still ask it.
Oh,
You and I live in the U.S.
yes.
How is it to be an Arab today in the U.S.? Actually, an Arab with a Jewish name, because Fisher is a very Jewish name. You know that. Everyone asked me.
I know that. Yes, when I was in Israel, people were
is-
excited.
Yeah, is he Jewish? No, I told them no. So how is it to be an Arab professor in the US? And don't tell us exactly everything you think, but tell us how much you're afraid of being on a call like that today.
I'm not. I am not afraid. And I'm not concerned. I think afraid is a big word even. I'm not concerned at all. But I think I'm kind of oblivious. And reckless. So for example, when Smadar talked to me about translating my novel, what was it, like maybe 15 years ago already, right?
Yes.
My immediate reaction is like, yes, of course, I'd be happy to. I'm just like, are you going to sign with you? Yeah, of course I'm going to sign with Yedioth. But then what about normalization? It's like, I don't know. What about it? So, whatever. It is, you live only once. So are you going to live?
But you know the trick that Aswani did with the translation.
So wait, we'll get there, Smadar, we'll get there. I
Yeah.
want you to mention this in a second.
I just,
So-
I do what I want. I do what I want
Okay.
to do. This is a decision, and I want to live freely. I want to be able to say what I want to say, and I want to be able to live the way I want to live. And this is partly why I left Egypt. So I'm not going to bring those limitations with me to the United States. Even when I was in Egypt, I was living like this. So
Are you allowed to go to Egypt now after all the books that you released?
I am allowed to go. I don't know if I'm allowed to leave.
Ah,
So
okay. Okay. Got it. Okay. So let's jump to the next chapter of our call. Okay. The next chapter of our call is the book. Smadar, if you can lift the book, and I'm pointing to the book on my screen here. Okay. So the book name is All This Nonsense.
Book.
And before we continue to talk about the book, I want to give a little bit of background, because we actually found the person who was so substantial in translating many of the movies that we grew up on, which is the Egyptian movies. And when we met with Smadar, we found out that she's the one for the first session of the movies, which were on every television on Israel when I grew up in the 70s. Everyone saw Egyptian movies on Friday afternoon, and this is how we accept the Shabbat. And we found out that Smadar actually translated those films, and we also found that they were brought in by the Mossad. The Mossad had to smuggle it, and Smadar was collaborating with the Mossad.
that's a great job. I wish I have a job like that. Smuggle movies.
And she would translate it. And we grew up on that. So we were very close to the Egyptian culture. And then they stopped
did you
it.
watch Sirrit Aravit? It's an Israeli documentary.
You pronounce it different.
Yeah, because I don't speak Hebrew.
Wh-
It's called Arab movie. Sirrit Aravit.
Yes, yes.
It's a documentary about that, yes.
About the Egyptian movie, yes.
But after this thing stopped, for a long time, there was like a complete disconnection between what's going on in Egypt and what's going on in Israel, though many Israelis are visiting Sinai for the longest, especially people from this unit, because we are divers and we like to dive in Sinai. And then came the Jacobian building, the book. And Smadar told us that it was kind of hijacked and unofficially brought to Israel. And it wasn't officially translated, but now your book is like, remind me very much of Jacobian building, because you are trying, I gotta tell you, with a great success of sexuality and relationship between a man and woman, to explain the fabric of the society of Egypt and all the Tahrir square story throughout relationship between a man and a woman. I would say a woman and a man in this case, because she is the one that leading the thing. And I can't thank you enough for writing this book. I enjoyed it, and I learned so much about the complexity. So tell us about the book. What made you write it, and how you brought it to Israel?
So the book, I wrote it in 2015 and 2016, and it's mainly because I was part of the Tahrir uprising, and I lived through the euphoria that we had and the hope, and through the collapse of that hope as well. And I lived it both at, it touches my personal life, my work, my career, but also the friends and the people that became my colleagues, and I accompanied them in this movement. And I think, again, you have worked a lot on 67, its impact on Egyptian society and cultural life. And Tahrir Uprising is a little bit like that. It has a very deep impact on society, on families, on friendships, and on the way Egyptians see themselves and see the world and see everybody else. So it's not, for me, it's a fundamental kind of transformation that was taking place, and I wanted to write about that. And I also wanted to understand and to make other people understand that new generation that I saw coming up in Egypt, which I thought was the best hope Egypt had to become a normal country. And I watched as this generation was being destroyed and struggling with hope and despair. And I think the novel reflects, I hope the novel is reflecting that struggle more than anything else.
I want to tell you the piece that two pieces I like very much is one, there's relationship between a woman and her spouse. He's a police officer.
Yeah.
Hyman, I think his name, and how you are getting into both their hands in such a sensitive way, and you're not judgmental. You explaining what he feels, a chauvinist man, and what she feels as a woman that find that she has the right to say and feel and do that. And the other piece that I really like is the couple, the gay couple that decide to go out public. And this guy decided, screw the world. I want to tell them, like, he's gay, but he's like, he has the testosterone, and he's like, screw the world, I can handle it. And all the difficulties that they have after they go out of the closet. So
Yes,
where did you get this? I mean, do you know people like that in person? Did you interview them for the book?
well, it's like, I think like most fiction, it's a combination of both. So there is a lot, it's fiction. So there is not a single character in the novel that has a corresponding person. But you see glimpses of people and you put together characters. And I just want to say something about the story of the gay couple. I did not want to write a novel that glorifies the Tahrir uprising or glorifies that generation. I wanted it to be realistic. And everybody who's been involved in this movement have seen there were people who were calling for freedom, but at the same time were misogynists, right? So the way they treated their girlfriends was terrible. They were calling for equality, but then the way, they're not the way they treat, I don't know, treat women, treat Copts, treat this. And the same thing with the gay couple. So the question was during that uprising, it's like something that is coming out from a very long kind of repression, and things are not clear. People's minds are not clear. And this is why many people who were liberals at the time, few years later, would support the military. And some of them will be very kind of antagonistic to people that they consider different, whether the difference is gender or something else. But it's all that I wanted to capture. And I'll finish here. To capture things, you have to empathize with the characters, even with the perspectives that you do not, especially with the perspectives you do not share. You have to understand the reasons. People do things for reason, and you have to get that.
I want you to write a book about the what we call in Israel Rothschild or Kaplan or Kikar Chatufim in Israel, because we have exactly the same thing. And people one day stand with big signs of democracy, and the next day they go to war, and they don't mind if even an Israeli Arab will lose all his right because he's Arab. And it's like, so do you believe in democracy or you do not believe in democracy? And that's exactly the same thing as happened in Israel. It's like you believe in freedom and you stand in Tahrir Square, and the second later, democracy is freedom, but not for gays, but not for women, and not for that. It's exactly the same thing that happened in Israel. We can sit with you, we give you the script, you just write it down. How about that?
That's great. Sign me up.
Yoav and Smadar, any more questions and comments about the book before we jump to the next chapter about Israel and Egypt relationship?
I, of course, enjoyed reading it. I read a few others also.
Yes. We have to mention that there were others, and the other books are as good as this one.
Right.
So,
but it's well, it's I actually I don't know how to talk about a novel in a Zoom, I have to say. I mean, in the sense that normally we ask the students to read it first, and then and then we have a discussion. But I was I'm thinking about the next topic mostly, or about Egyptian and Israeli relationship.
so let's take a quick break. See if anyone has any question about
I want to mention
the
that
book or any of the books.
I
Go for it.
invited the translator of Ezzedine's books here, Bruria. I don't know if she's present. If she is, let her say something.
Bruria, if you are here, please open the microphone and ask any question that you may have and would like to hear your perspective of the translation. If not, I'll give you some time. Anyone has any question about?
Yeah, I do. It's not about the book because I didn't read it, You mentioned twice the Coptic in Egypt. At the first phase, you said that they are not using their pilgrim privilege to come to Jerusalem, and then you mentioned them again. Why is that? Do you see them as some kind of importance part in the Egyptian society?
Yes, absolutely. Egyptian Copts are at least 10% of the population.
Wow, I didn't know that.
The
Yeah.
church estimates them at a higher number, but the state says it's 10%. And a 10% in Egypt is is a lot of people.
Wow.
And historically, Egypt has been Coptic before anything else. So it is part of the fabric of society, and they're not concentrated in areas. They are everywhere, which makes them even more part of that fabric. But there has always been, all Arab states, modern Arab states, had to struggle a little bit with minorities and with the idea of equality. While the law makes everybody equal, but the practice is far from that equality, especially when it comes to political rights. So we could have a couple of ministers from time to time, but I don't remember any Coptic prime minister except actually one before 1952 who was also assassinated. So
And
uh,
you have the Boutros Ghali.
Boutros Ghali, who never became a
Yes,
foreign minister, right? He remained.
yes,
I worked for Boutros Ghali. I don't know if you remember, but
yes.
that was my first assignment in a foreign service, and he was Minister of State for Foreign Relations
Because he was
because it
because
will
he
be
was
hard for the majority to accept. So there is like in Egypt and in other Arab countries, there is always this question: is this a state or is this a Muslim state? And that has implications for citizenship rights and equality in general.
But the people, the regular people, not the government or the establishment, are they tolerant to the Christian, to the Coptic,
Yes.
or they
It's
have
And-
a
and-
hostile
and
attitude to it?
no.
Let me just refrain it, the question that Ami just asked. I was thinking, what is worse, to be black in the US or Arab in Arab Israeli? So since you lived in the US, in Egypt, and in Israel, what is it now? We can have another category: black in the US, Arab Israeli, Palestinian Israeli, or Coptic Egyptian. Which one is the worst minority to be?
Ori, this is not reframing. This is complicating the question. I prefer Ami's question actually. Let me start there by, as far as tolerance is concerned, with very few exceptions, there has always been a high level of tolerance. We have seen exceptions and some tension and some incidents that take place in communities in Upper Egypt, which is more conservative, and that's associated also with the presence of Islamists. So there is that kind of issue. But generally, there is tolerance. But it's tolerance, and this is where the Black Americans come in. It's tolerance that is like, when you ask someone, you say, you're not a very tolerant person. It's like, why? I have a Coptic friend, right?
Yeah, exactly the same. I have an Arab friend. We always
Exactly,
say
yeah.
that.
It's like, who's your friend? It's the hummus guy that I go to. So, so there is a bit of that too. Intermarriages are extremely difficult, for example. That's usually a good criteria.
Yeah.
I have another question about the book and more about your feelings as an author. So we heard in the last two sessions also that a very, very large majority of the population in Egypt is they can't read. So as an author, how do you find that like you're writing to a population that, I don't know if it's the majority, but a large part of it won't be able to read your book. And if you don't publish the book outside of Egypt, you're kind of at a limited audience. So how do you feel about that?
Let me qualify it. Is the rate of illiteracy is far from the majority. So the people who cannot read and write are probably, I don't know, 15% maybe, or something like that, right? But the rate of people who are actually going to read a book is a lot less. So it's not that they cannot read, it is worse. It's they don't want to read, right? But but that's kind of, it's a fact of life that if you're an author, you have to live with, which means if you sell 5,000 copies, that's a great success. Like Naguib Mahfouz books used to sell something like between 2,000 and 5,000. So this is what it is. At the same time, the Egyptian market remains the bigger market in the Arab world. So if I don't get my books published in Egypt, that's a serious problem because this is where most of the readership is. So the problem is a shared problem, and it's about readership. It is not about the ability to read and write. And ultimately, you hope that somebody, I have a brother who read my novels, and my brother and my sister, and they both told me this is the first novel they ever read after they finished school, right? So I brought two people in. That's not bad.
It's the same thing as here we have in the parliament. A lot of people are having difficulties of listening to some of the things that we're saying here. Either if we bring someone really on the right wing or on the left wing, everyone is hating us. Now, in Israel, there's a movie called 1948, To Remember and to Forget, which was actually paid for by the Israeli public broadcasting television, was made, and then they decided, nope, we don't want to present it. A lot of the people in the government said, oh, no, don't tell anything about that is getting close to what's called the Nakba, the Palestinian thing. It's a forbidden word in Israel and stuff like that. So anyone in Israel that is doing something that, even if it's 100% truth based on fact, if it's not in the mainstream narrative, fact today, because it's a right-wing government, if it's not in the right-wing government narrative, he is called anti-Semite. There's a film that won an Oscar. The minister of whatever culture, I don't know if you call him that. It's like he will never even listen or even read the reviews of the film. He boycotted. He made sure no one with government funding will ever screen it. Or so it's like in what goes down is that even my mom. I always take my mom as example, especially in English, because she'll never listen to this thing. So I can have good jokes on her. And she told me this is a very anti-Semite film. What is going on in Egypt? You don't have the word anti-Semite, or you probably don't use it against your people, even though you guys are also Semite.
Yeah.
So what is the trend within Egypt? If someone put a book like All This Nonsense, which has tons of critique about the Egyptian society, and I know that you want them to read it because you want the gays to be free and you want the woman to be free, but you know that the mainstream Egyptian is going to look at you very negatively. What does the Egypt society address that? How?
There's some now dead Arab author who once wrote, in fact, there's an Arab American author, Fuad Ajami, who once wrote that, quoting that person, that Arab writers face three terrors. They face the terror of the state, the repression, They face the terror of religious institutions if they say something that they don't like. But the biggest terror is the terror of the public. And here, if you challenge the narrative, not of the coalition, not the narrative of the government, but the narrative of the public, if you write something that diminishes that narrative, then you're in deep trouble. And I was worried about that. I'm still worried about that. But it didn't happen to me. And it's kind of accidental. Sometimes it happens to people and you wonder, and others get away. But as a writer, you have to decide, are you going to kind of, what's the word? Are you going to feed the narrative that the people like to hear about themselves, make them feel good? Or are you going to challenge that because you care and because you want things to change and be better? And it's a personal choice. But there is a risk, and it's a risk that you cannot calculate. That's the beauty of it. It's very random. But if you decide to do it, then that's it. And I think early on, my first two novels, I was still a diplomat and I published them with no publicity whatsoever because I couldn't, because I was a diplomat. But the publisher told me there are few things that are going to be problematic for the reader, not for the state. And if you can change them, and I thought about it, I was just like, you know what? I'm a diplomat. My life is very structured, and I kind of follow discipline and orders and instructions and so on. And writing novels is the only area where I do what I want and I say what I want. So if the reader is going to be unhappy, screw that. It doesn't matter. And then it became too late for me to retreat. So now, this is where I am.
So I have a question, Ezzedine, about the literary scandals, as political scandals, which is it's actually a tradition. I think the first one is George Zaidan, early 20th century, then Tahsin, Naguib Mahfouz had. But then there are the books who you expect to be a total scandal. I think Smadar mentioned Alay al-Aswani, and it wasn't.
Yeah.
Even though, there is a corrupt sheikh there that gives fatwa that has anything to do with religion, just to secure a political position and so on. So if one has to reflect on these dynamics, could you say that sometimes it is a scandal when a certain set of political conditions are met, and we can kind of discern them when there's already a certain dissatisfaction, and that could be leveraged? And in a way, you can calculate at the moment of publication and at the year of publication whether it's going to be a scandal or not, except that some scandals are activated retroactively.
Exactly.
The book that has been published 5 years
That
ago.
has been, yes. Yeah. I think it's very random. I think people overestimate when you think it's calculated. I think that's you overestimate that there is a system. There isn't most of the time. And I don't know if you remember, there was this case, a book that has been there for a long, long time. Somebody accidentally read it. One of those people who don't usually read, which you would think sometimes it's a blessing too, read it or just like was very offended and then made a scandal out of it. And the government had to kind of send people to, collect the book to take it off the shelves. So it's very random. It's very random. And the randomness makes it harder, not easier.
Right. The biggest literary scandal in Lebanon started in Egypt in the 60s.
Oh.
Yeah, Leila al-Balbeki's novel that had a sexual scene in it, not as racy as yours, nothing as your sex scenes, but literary critic Louis Awad wrote about it, and that was it for her in Lebanon. So it's actually infectious. It could be infectious.
Look, so far, I got away with this. I got away with publishing in Israel. We'll see how far I can push that.
Wish you good luck. My basement is at your service if you need to hide somewhere.
Right.
So,
I hope
so
not under the water, though.
okay.
By
No,
the way, are there any Israeli authors' books that are translated to Arabic and are sold in Egypt?
Yes, yes.
Amos
there
Oz
are.
and like
What's the name of the
Amos Oz, Sami
Amos?
Michael.
Yes, Amos Oz. Who wrote Yasmina? Was it Amos Oz?
No, it was Sami Michael.
Okay.
And Sami Michael calls himself an Arab Israeli, even though
Arab
he's
Jew.
Jewish.
An
he
Arab
calls
Jew.
an Arab Jew.
Arab Jew.
Arab Jew.
Yes.
So, and by the
Um,
way, we would like to add the Phoenicians here, because many people in Israel never heard the term Arab Jew, but you know, he out loud come and say, "Hey, I'm an Arab because I was born in an Arab country. I'm a Jew, so I'm an Arab Jew." The same way in Israel, most people don't know that they call them Arab Israelis, but they identify themselves as Palestinian Israelis. So it's things that we teach people. But
There
guys,
are also Egyptian Israelis, or Israeli Jews from Egypt,
yeah,
and
absolutely.
they were both in the
Um,
Kibbutzim movement and in the general population.
Yeah, Ami, you mentioned, I think 2 weeks ago, Israel Gershoni, who's a historian of liberal Egypt. His book was published. It was in Egypt. It was supposed to be a big celebration. Is the book that is supposed to, it's the most sophisticated. He's the most sophisticated scholars of liberal Egypt. And one of the things that happened after the publisher put a public bid and invited him and so on, someone saw it and kind of canceled him, and that was the end of it. Like the hundreds of books that have been printed were not even sold, sent to the stores.
No, I can understand it because you had Andalus, Yael Lerer's publication, and she took a lot of Arabic books, Egyptian books. Most of the Arabic books that I read translated by Andalus. And at that time, the
But
second Intifada.
you know who was her partner, member of Knesset Azmi Bishara.
Azmi Bishara was her mentor, I
Azmi
think.
Bishara was her partner of Yael Lerer.
So I didn't know that. But anyway, they started a short time before the second Intifada, and immediately once the Intifada started, everybody stopped. I think except
It
me,
was closed.
and they couldn't sell anything. Nobody wanted to read the books. It was influenced by the Intifada violence. So I can understand why Israel Gershoni books wasn't accepted there.
And I can understand because I read also your book, Ami. I know why your books is not that accepted in Israel. So that's another story.
Wait for the second one. It's coming up.
Okay.
I
So
look for
guys,
refugee in Egypt.
I would like to jump into the third and the last chapter of this call. It's Israel-Egypt relationship. And I'd like Smadar and Yoav to run this thing, and I want to take a step back and basically we'll have a free call about that. We heard a lot. The first session we had on Egypt was with Smadar, and she told us such personal stories about because she know the people who cooked the book, who made the recipe and she were in the house, she was sitting on their table. She spoke with Joan Sadat and everyone, and then we heard from Yoav and Mira on the second session that we had about that. But I want to go deep into the relationship between Israel and Egypt, and I'm just going to throw one question, and then I'm going to let Smadar and Yoav talk. Is the relationship between Israel and Egypt going to survive the war in Gaza? This is my first question.
to me?
The Egyptian
yeah.
president answered this,
What did he say?
that the will.
Yeah, I think it from the Egyptian side, I think it will survive. From the Israeli side, I am not sure.
So,
I'm optimistic on this, but it will stay on a very, very, very low profile.
So let's kind of go back a little bit to 2006, 2007, when Israel begins its plans to retreat from Gaza, because I think we can say that there's a lot to say about Israel-Egyptian relationship from 77 onwards. But the retreat from Gaza, the Israeli retreat from Gaza changes actually the peace accord in the sense that now the Palestinian Authority is going to have a border with Egypt. And that used to be an Israeli border. And that required, if I recall, some changes to the agreement itself. Can you walk us back to this moment where Sharon wants to retreat from Gaza? And correct me if I'm wrong, the Egyptian government is skeptical about this move.
Yes. At the time, the Egyptian government and others were trying to convince Prime Minister Sharon to organize the withdrawal in consultation and agreement with the Palestinian Authority, which he refused. And only at the very end, there was an actual negotiation about the security arrangements that happens after that. For a while, which echoed a little bit what happened over the last year, there were voices, especially in Israel, that wanted an Egyptian security role in Gaza after the withdrawal. And they basically wanted boots on the ground, not just advisors. And that kind of consumed a lot of the discussions about that part. And the Egyptian position has and continues to be very reluctant to get involved directly in Gaza. There was a similar kind of conversation about the border, the crossing. The crossing was a very important issue. And ultimately, the agreement that was reached with the Europeans saved face for everybody because it allowed Israel to get what it wants, and it allowed Egypt to say, I am not collaborating with Israel, I am just running my border, my side. And I think those kind of moments explain some of the issues in the relationship between Egypt and Israel. As far as the amendment of the peace treaty, that was done. And every time there was a need to change the deployment and the security presence, the two sides always found agreement. That was never, to the best of my knowledge, that was never an issue. There was an issue later about the smuggling, the arms smuggling, but that's a different story.
Right. No, that's important because 2 weeks ago, there were various questions in the forum about the Egyptian military position in the Sinai. So that I think clarifies a lot. Now, once Hamas takes over the Gaza Strip, how does the Egyptian position evolves vis-a-vis that development?
It wasn't really evolved. It was a quick switch off. At the time, Prime Minister Olmert flew to Sharm el-Sheikh and met President Mubarak, and President Mubarak called Abu Mazen, and it was decided at that meeting to establish the regime that became the regime of crossing, whereby there's no permanent regular opening of the crossing. That was something the three parties wanted and the three parties agreed to, and that remained in place and continues to be in place. So the border gets opened from an Egyptian side, and also that takes into account the Kerem Shalom, the moving stuff to Kerem Shalom, so that the Israeli side has some level of control over what happens. And the security cooperation between the two sides kind of fill whatever gaps that remained. People don't, I think people underestimate the level of cooperation between Egypt and Israel, especially in the security domain.
Right. Actually, we discussed that, except none of us have the details. I mean, Smadar might more than us. We're historians, but what's the scope of that?
I think that there are very good relations going under the ground, and nobody speaks about it.
Yes,
So why don't we speak about it?
Why do we have to?
Here we go.
There
is a reason.
But I mean, no. But I want to add one more thing. Ordinary Israelis cannot go to Egypt. They don't give a visa, they don't give a permission, and they prefer that the Israelis will stay at home.
Yeah, because it is, if I understand correctly, it's because it is a security risk and liability. This is what I mean by people underestimating the level from Egypt's side, and I think also from Israel's side, at least until this government, maintaining that front quiet, avoiding problems, is a paramount imperative. Nobody on the Egyptian government side want to see any disturbance to the security situation between the two countries, or incidents, or anything that could come under everything. If a good day is a day when nothing happens, as far as security is concerned between the two countries. And that covers who travels, what the regimes of traveling are and the crossings, the security cooperation about deployment and non-deployment, everything. Avoiding anything that leads to an escalation to an incident is the most important security concern.
But okay, that's on the security level. Then there's there's the agricultural kind of technological aspect that is also decades long, I think, agricultural cooperation. And then there was the gas that is, the energy corporation, which is also, I think,
still exists. The gas still exists. The agreement.
Right, and that's what, it's about $1 billion. It's an enormous sum of money. I remember. It's very significant. Can you give us a sense of that kind of infra economic reality?
I think Smadar probably can talk about this better than I am. My work was more on the diplomatic side, and those deals were done mostly privately and involved special interests as well, both in Israel and in Egypt. And there were competing commercial interests on these issues on both sides. So there were people in Israel, gas interests that were in favor of deals, and other gas interests that were against those deals because it undermines their and so on. So maybe Smadar can talk about this more. Or not.
No.
Top secret, top secret.
No, it's not top secret. It's not interesting.
Okay. Can I interfere? I want to ask about the Egyptian role versus the Qatar role in brokering any deal with the hostages. We try to go and talk about the hostages, the Israeli hostages. Yeah, I know it's sometimes I feel a little bit uncomfortable mentioning hostages because Israel now is back in war and will probably kill many more hostages, the number of hostages every day in Gaza. for the hostages. So, you know, it's almost not fair to compare value of human to human, because Israelis are like, oh, you know, release the hostages and we'll stop the war. Though we know that even if Hamas will release the hostages, you know, maybe I'm not an expert, but I don't think they will stop the war. But I want to get back to, after kind of sneaking in my input, I wanted to hear who's more important, the Qatarian or the Egyptians in brokering the deal, and who has better chances?
The short answer is I don't know. But I don't think it really matters. I don't think the deal, whether you have a deal or not, depends on who's the broker as much as the conditions, whether the conditions are met or not. Does this make sense? Am I clear?
Yes, but it's not clear, because in Israel we want Hamas to be away, and I know in Egypt wants Hamas to be away.
Yes, but that's the difference. A lot of people say, you know, Arab states want Hamas to disappear. Yeah, but they know it's not going to disappear, or at least that's their conclusion. It's not going to disappear. So they have to take this into account. While Israel, or at least the government, thinks that it can disappear. And I think this is where part of the problem is.
So explain us this thing, because most of the people believe in Israel that more power will make Hamas go away. Are they going away or are they not?
Where shall they go away?
The whole concept of Hamas, will it go away with more Israel forcing them to go away? Is there a way for the Israeli military might to make Hamas go away?
Look, my personal opinion doesn't matter, right?
It
What
matters. If it won't matter, we won't talk to you. We talk to you because we want to hear your personal opinion.
I think what matters is the analysis I can provide, but the assessment of whether Hamas can disappear or not is really, you know, I'm not a military or a security expert, and even security experts disagree on this. But the important thing in your question, is to remember the following. Egypt, just like Jordan, have a kind of antagonistic relationship with the Islamist groups, including Hamas. And in an ideal world, their ideal world will not include Hamas. But Egypt and Jordan have concluded long ago that they cannot get rid of it. It cannot disappear. And that no matter how much power you use, how much destruction you inflict on Gaza, Hamas cannot be eradicated. Then they have, when they negotiate and when they think of the future, they have to maintain a good functioning relationship with Hamas. And that is the difference between their position and the position of the government of Israel.
Do you know the story of Masada? Have you heard the
Yes.
place Masada?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, those ancient Hebrews or Jews,
Right.
they did not give up.
Yes.
Eventually, after a few years, the Roman circle Masada built all the thing, and after the day they were able to break the fort of Masada, they found all the Jews slaughtered themselves,
Yeah.
other than one that was able to tell the story.
Okay.
And I feel that Hamas is the same. I'm wondering if Hamas are half Jewish, because they're willing to kill the entire population of Gaza, including themselves, but they're not going to surrender.
It's a false
Maybe.
analogy, Ori.
But I can't find better analogy. So is there any chance I could, because you know, I have discussion with people that have the approval to take down buildings. And I talked to them and I said, you take down this building, is this gonna help the hostages? Is this gonna help anything? And I don't know what to make out of it. They don't surrender, those guys.
They do not surrender. whether you can take them out or not is a question again that maybe military experts can answer. But as far as Egypt is concerned, Egypt cannot force Hamas to accept something that Hamas does not want to accept. That's what we need to remember. When you think of negotiations and ceasefire, you need to remember that Egypt cannot force Hamas to accept something that they are against. They can put pressure, but not force them to change course completely.
I want to ask you the same question I asked Mira and Yoav the last time. I live next to a place where all the Egyptians after Tahrir Square escape into the US. In my community, I have tons of Copts. I thought all the Copts in Egypt moved to New Jersey, and then they tell me now they have 10 more million people there. So I know Egyptians very well. They are very generous. They're very warm people. They are loving people. I have many Egyptian friends. My kids have Egyptian friends. I know they're generous. Gaza Strip is less than 0.5% of the size of Sinai. Sinai is almost empty, population-wise. Why Egyptians are not willing to just open the border and move and have a little colony in Gaza? US will pay funds, Israel will pay, the Saudis, the Kuwaits, the Qatari, everyone will, the Gazans will build their own homes. Why is this not a valid solution?
I see Yoav is laughing. So Yoav, do you want to take this question first?
No, you
Oh,
have
I
already
answered it 2
answered.
weeks ago.
Oh, okay.
I left 2 weeks ago already.
Okay, you've been laughing. All right. This has nothing to do with being generous or not. This has to do with the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, and between Israel and the Arab world as a whole. The majority, the great majority of Egyptians, all political colors combined, are not going to willingly do something that would contribute to destroying the hope of Palestinians to build a national home in Palestine. It is as simple as that. And think of it, think how Israeli Jews are attached to the idea of a national home. For the Palestinians and for the Arabs, it's the same thing. The attachment to a Palestinian national home in Palestine, not in Saudi Arabia, not in the Sinai Desert, not in Congo, nowhere else, in Palestine. That's where their national home is, and that's where they should be able to build and exercise self-determination and build that national home. Whether this is realistic or not is a different question. But this is where the people at. So anything related to Palestine or the Palestinians is assessed as how people think it will impact that possibility. If you tell them the same question was asked 70 years ago, why don't you take the refugees that you already have? Why don't you give them citizenship instead of keeping them in camps? Because at the time, people thought if we do this, it will eliminate the problem and then will undermine the Palestinians' prospect to exercise the right of return and national home and what have you. Again, you might think this is not smart, you might think it's not realistic. That's an assessment, but that's how the majority of people see it. Did I answer your question?
Listen, this is the answer. There's no, there's no right or wrong in our parliament. But I do have a serious question.
Yeah.
And this is something that you can really answer. Now, we figure you're not Jewish, right?
Yeah.
Are you Coptic?
No. Muslim family.
So you're a Muslim family. Okay. The notion in Israel, the narrative in many of my friends and colleagues,
Yes.
Ami is already smiling, so I don't know if he's smiling because of that, is that all Muslims almost genetically hate Jews. we have quite few people in our group, and we talk daily. The name of all the people that are sure that all the Muslims hate the Jews always starts with Aleph. It's the first letter of the Israeli or the Hebrew alphabet. It's like I don't want to mention the names, but they're like and also my name starts with that. But they're like they're 100% confident that Muslims, they hate Jews, they want to kill Jews, they want to, it's like it, and you know, it's an obsessive thing that comes to us from our epigenomic thing, which has come from the Holocaust and come from persecutions of many generations. So help us with that. Are you or are you not ready to kill Jews from the day you were born?
Like me?
No, but you know, help
I'm a
me.
vegetarian. Ori, I'm a
You're-
vegetarian, my friend.
Okay,
I
okay.
don't kill chicken.
So help us, help the people here.
Look, it obviously it's complicated. There are Muslims who hate Jews and there are Muslims who do not hate Jews, right? Now, just to start, remember, historically, the Muslim majority societies were safer for Jewish communities than any other society. Let's remember that. So Jews during the Ottoman Empire lived relatively much more peacefully and protected than in Western and Eastern Europe. They were not equal citizen, but nobody was equal in the Ottoman Empire. It's not based on equality. It was based on different communities and a kind of a system of separation. All right. So historically, there has been no serious problem between Muslims and Jews, probably since the time of the Prophet himself and the early fights with the tribes in Medina. But since then, there has been no serious problem between Muslims and Jews. Smadar mentioned at the beginning Egyptian Jews. I taught a course about Egyptian Jews for a while, and if you look at the history of Jewish communities in Egypt since antiquity, it is a history of integration and so on. There was, again, no problem between Muslims and Jews, at least not more than between Muslims and Christians or Muslims and Copts. It's kind of a majority relationship to a minority. Not equal.
Start by mentioning Yaqub Sanua.
By mentioning Yaqub Sanua, who built the Egyptian cinema. It's not just, right?
Yes.
So there is, it was a very vibrant community and was part of the cultural scene in Egypt. And, Yoav can also, talk more authoritatively about that. But then you have two things that happened. You have the establishment of the state, 48, and that changed, if you look at Egypt, that changed the relationship between the Jewish community in Egypt and the majority. How Henry Curiel, one of the founders of the Communist Party, and not only him, but in fact, most of the communist movement at the time was Jewish. And those young people who kind of devoted their life to the improvement of the conditions of the fallahin and the workers and so on, suddenly became viewed as Jews, not as citizens, not as Egyptians. Okay? But this had to do with 48 and 56. The other transformative kind of element is the Salafi movement and the Islamist movement. And the Islamist movement has a literalist reading of religious texts. This is where you get all the crazy stuff about killing Jews and we will fight them until the day of judgment, and when the rock is gonna move and say, I'm hiding a Jew, come and kill him, this kind of thing.
What years are you talking about?
The rise of the kind of Salafi literalist reading of Islam began in the 70s and then became dominant or became a dominant movement in the 80s and then in the 90s. And it created Al-Qaeda, it created ISIS, and so on. So those movements have an anti-Semitic kind of attitude towards Jews. And some of this is still with the Muslim Brotherhood, and you will find some of it also in Hamas. So this is where the confusion is coming from. It's both a literalist reading of religion and a nationalist reaction to the Israeli-Palestinian problem. Does this make sense?
Makes sense to me.
I want to make a little bit complicated.
By the way, we open the forum now to questions. Okay, so
Yeah.
Ami always likes to ask the first question. So
And the last
Ami,
one.
and the last one. Go for it, Ami.
The way I see the conflict, or the basic of it, is because 90% of the Jews at the earliest stage of the Zionism, at the end of the 19th century, were Jewish European, suffering from the Christianity movements and from all the monarchies, especially in East Europe, while the Jews in the Arab states were about 10%, and they didn't suffer, or unlike the European Jews. Yeah. So the narrative which brought up the Zionism was actually a European narrative, which was based on a colonialism and the European approach towards those who are like in Africa or even in America and so on. So the narrative came with the basic aspects of the Zionism. So that can be understood. They came to the Middle East, they didn't understand the culture, they didn't understand the language, they didn't understand anything about it. And they thought, like the European did, well, we'll have a colonialism. The enigma that I have no answer is, why did the Jews that were born and raised and lived with the Muslims became recently much more, that's my impression, much more aggressive towards the Muslim, claiming to, like, people who came from Europe, listen, we know the Muslims because we lived with them. They are very, they are willing to kill you and so on, all these phrases that are being used. Why do you think their reaction towards the conflict was, if you have any explanation, because I don't have any explanation, I cannot understand this phenomena. No, it's an enigma for me.
I think, and what Ami refers, the Mizrahi Jews, the people that came from Morocco and Egypt and Iraq and Arab countries.
They should have been much more tolerant, and recently they became, not everybody, you have Yehuda Shenhav and you have Sami Michael, which we mentioned, but most of the people are very, very anti-Muslim and claiming, we know the Muslims. You don't know the Muslim, you don't understand them.
Yes, by the way, we had Yehuda Shenhav visiting us last week, so had the pleasure to talk to him. I think it's a very interesting question. And I'm going to say a couple of things and you correct me or tell me what you think. I think there might be a difference between people who themselves lived and grew up there and the kind of the generations that came afterwards. I remember, for example, in the documentary I'm talking about the Arab movie, there is an Israeli who came from Egypt, and she on camera was talking about how her son died in a war in 1967. And she said how difficult this was for her because her son was fighting the Egyptians and she feels Egyptian and killed by the Egyptians. And at the end, after she says that, the interviewers ask her if she blames Egypt. And she tears up and she says, I can't. I mean, this is my home and this is my home too, right? And I detect a level of nostalgia, especially among Iraqi Jews, Moroccan Jews, and Egyptian Jews, but among the generation that actually lived and left. Now, modifier to this, the conditions of departure make a difference. If you were kicked out or if you lived voluntarily. if you were allowed to take your belongings and sell your property, or if you were denied that. Okay? So those are kind of elements. Add to this a third element, and I stop there, which might be a parallel to the Jews who came from the Soviet Union and who had this very right-wing kind of position generally, right? Because it's everything that's, again, it's part of you're cutting relations with the past and you're building a new identity that is anchored in this new, in Israel. So part of this is to, and it also saying, you know, it gives you capital that I know these people, that I know how to deal with them, and so on and so forth. That's as best as I can kind of analyze this. But it's, I think the question is more interesting than the answers, frankly.
That Socrates said, no, that the question is more important than the answer.
Yeah.
No, so I think that the second explanation that you had, I agree with it, because I think that it's equivalent to the Palestinians that they were they left in 48, and the generation that came after, they felt that they didn't just feel it. It's a truth that they lost everything. So then they hate those who took it from them. So maybe this is the same explanation for the generation that grew in Israel and saying, our parents had a mention in Cairo and they never received compensation for it. So it's kind of equivalent to the same narrative.
Guys, the forum is open to question. It's getting late, and we are ready to wrap it up now. Any more questions?
I have one question. We talked about the Muslim Brotherhood. Actually, I have two questions, and you can choose to answer one, both, or neither. So one question about the Muslim Brotherhood is, what's the relationship or the feelings between the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas? That's one question. Second question, it's more about Palestinians, maybe not so much about Egyptians, but Israelis, the Israelis love to claim, the hawkish Israelis, they love to claim that so many people in Gaza are actually not native to Gaza and Palestine. They're Egyptians, and they give examples by their name is Masri and their name is this, and this indicates that they've immigrated from Egypt to Gaza or the West Bank, and now they consider themselves Palestinians. So if you can address that question, that's the second question.
Okay. The Muslim Brotherhood is, so there are Islamist organizations in all Arab countries or Muslim majority countries, and they are linked, but each of them is distinct and independent. So the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas are not like part of one entity, they're related. They're sister organizations, let's say, but each of them is an independent organization. And that has been the case since the establishment of the Muslim Brotherhood. From time to time, there will be, of course, solidarity, there will be some type of cooperation, but different agendas, different issues, different structures, and so on and so forth. All right? I think the best example of this would be during the year when Mohammed Morsi was president. And if you have, if you look at the policies that the Egyptian government took at the time, they were not fundamentally different from the policies before or after, even if there was more warmer rhetoric towards Hamas and so on. But the actual parameters on the ground have not changed of that policy. And I think that that's likely to continue. On the second question, I'm sorry, what was the second question?
So there's a lot of Israelis, a lot of Israelis claim
Oh,
that
yes.
many Palestinians are not Palestinians.
Are Egyptians. This conflict, the definition of identity of each side has become wrapped up in both hatred and denial of the legitimacy of the other identity. So you will find Palestinians and Arabs who's like, there is no such thing as a Jewish nation. It's a religion, but it has never been a nation, right? And then the consequence is it legitimizes ideas like everybody should go back to, I don't know, Poland and Ukraine and wherever you came from. And the same thing happened. There is no Palestinian nationalism. There is no Palestinian nation. Those are a bunch of Arabs that some of them came from Jordan, some of them came from Egypt. But, why don't they just move and go back there? So those are not, scientifically speaking, this is not like objective analysis or anything. Those are claims that each side uses to legitimize certain ideas. Al-Masri, by the way, if I remember correctly, Al-Masri is one of the wealthiest people in Nablus. So unless Egypt has invaded all these areas during the Pharaonic time. So maybe Egypt should claim it. I don't know.
Thank you, everyone. Guys, any more questions?
Perfect
Dr.
timing. 2
Dr.
hours.
Fisher,
No doubt.
yeah, Dr. Fisher, I want to thank you very much. Really, it's been a pleasure. I never able to judge how the session went only the next day after I listened to it. But I got a good sense that a lot of things were communicated well, and I want to thank you very, very much. I want to thank the forum. Before we wrap up, I want to do what we usually do at the beginning, but I want to try and do it at the end, so maybe people would remember. We have the next 2 sessions. 2 weeks from now on, I think it's May 21, we have Rabbi Lau. Rabbi Lau is a nephew and a cousin of 2 other big Rabbi Lau, which was the chief rabbis of Israel. He's very famous because he's there's a movie about him. You should try and watch it before the next session. It's called Shabbat Queen, and he is starring in this movie. If no one knows who's this rabbi, it's called Rabbi Amichai Lau Lavi. And the 2 weeks later, we are talking with the former head of the police in Israel. His name is Kobi Shabtai or Yaakov Shabtai. He used to be our commander in the basic training, and we know him very well. And that is the wrapping for tonight. I want to thank everyone again. And again, Ezzedine, thank you so much. And we are going, and I want to thank Smadar from Yedioth. Say hi, Smadar.
I'm saying waving with the book.
Thank you. And I want to say thank you to Yoav and all from Austin that joined us, Dr. Yoav Dikapwa. And for the rest of the forum, have a good night and ma'asalam.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everybody.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Ma'asalam.
Ma'asalama.
Ma'asalama.